strange events thousands of years ago. The history of the ancient world is full of unsolved mysteries and enigmas, from the exact location of Cleopatra's tomb to the identity of Jack the Ripper, which have captured the public imagination for centuries. Some of these mysteries may never be revealed. Sometimes because the relevant excavated material is lost, or the ancient site is destroyed. In other cases, the remaining evidence is so ambiguous that it leads scholars to debate, or new evidence may never be presented. Some of these mysteries will likely never be solved, while others will be gradually eliminated from the list as modern technology advances. If archaeologists today find a clay ball, they might even use a nuclear reactor to deduce its chemical composition, whereas a 19th century archaeologist would have only had access to a shovel, pickaxe, and wheelbarrow. Of course, the fact that some of these mysteries remain unsolved to this day is part of their appeal. Burial place of Alexander the Great. By the time he was 32, Alexander the Great had conquered all of Asia, from the Balkans to Pakistan. He then became the ruler of the largest empire in the ancient world. He died of illness in Babylon, or modern-day Iraq, in 323 BC, and his vast empire collapsed like a house of cards. Historical records indicate that 2 years after Alexander's death and the fall of his empire, one of his generals returned his body to ancient Egypt and buried it in a tomb in the city of Memphis. However, no one knows exactly where Alexander's iconic tomb is. Some believe the tomb is submerged in water because it was built in the palace district, which is now underwater. If that's true, the tomb may have been destroyed by human and natural forces by now. Even if it is eventually found, there is likely little evidence to prove that the tomb belongs to Alexander the Great. Experts say there is no specific physical evidence of the described structure. The truth about King Arthur. The story of King Arthur has been told over and over again for over 1,000 years. The famous castle of Camelot, the Knights of the Round Table, the wizard Merlin, and the sword Excalibur in the stone are all well-known parts of the legendary story of King Arthur. However, if there really was a King Arthur, the reality was probably not so magical. The earliest accounts, dating back to the 9th century, tell of a leader who may not even have been a king, who fought in many battles against the ancient Saxons. Even the authenticity of these accounts is questionable. There are several ancient sites in Britain that are associated with the Arthurian legend, such as the coastal village of Tintagel in Cornwall, which is said to have been the home of King Arthur. But excavations have never confirmed whether the man known as King Arthur actually lived in Tintagel or even existed. Ultimately, it is unlikely that scholars will ever be able to determine for sure whether King Arthur actually existed or whether the man is purely fictional. The missing colonists in Roanoke. On July 22, 1587, English explorer John White arrived from England with 120 men on Roanoke Island, a town in present-day Randolph County, Alabama. A few months later, he sailed back to England to resupply the island's colonists. He finally returned to Roanoke 3 years later, only to find that all the inhabitants had disappeared. The only potential clue was the cryptic word Croatoan, carved on a fence and a tree trunk. White assumed that the Roanoke residents had travelled to Croat Island, now Hatteras Island, but a storm prevented White from reaching the island, and he never managed to find the Roanoke residents. Some ancient documents suggest that Chief Powhatan, the leader of the Powhatan Indian tribe at the time of the first encounter with the English colonists, killed the colonists, but there is no archaeological evidence to support this theory. Other theories suggest that the Roanoke colonists were attacked by Native Americans or the Spanish, or that they may have been wiped out by natural disasters. Who was Jack the Killer? In 1888, London's serial killer Jack the Ripper murdered and mutilated at least 5 women. A number of letters purporting to be from Jack the Ripper were sent to the police, taunting officers in their efforts to find him. The true identity of the sender was never revealed, but the name Jack the Ripper is derived from these letters. As you might guess, Jack the Killer's identity was never discovered, and over the years, dozens of people have been suggested as possible killers. In 2012, John Morris claimed in his book Jack the Killer the hand of a woman that Jack was the killer of a woman named Lizzie Williams, although other experts have questioned the veracity of this claim. It seems unlikely that the killer's true identity will ever be definitively revealed. Cleopatra's tomb. Some ancient historians claim that in 300 BC, Cleopatra VII, queen of the Ptolemaic dynasty, and her lover Mark Antony were buried together in a tomb. The Greek historian Plutarch wrote that the tomb was located near the Temple of Isis, the ancient Egyptian goddess. It was a tall and beautiful monument containing treasures of gold, silver, emeralds, pearls, ebony, and ivory. The location of the tomb remains a mystery. In 2010, former Egyptian Minister of Antiquities Zohri Hawass excavated a site near Alexandria, now known as Tabuzaris Magna. Several tombs dating back to Cleopatra VII's reign were located at the site, but Hawass reported to the press that Cleopatra VII's tomb was not among the structures discovered. Archaeologists have noted that even if Cleopatra's tomb survives intact today, it may have been heavily looted and effaced.